Welcome to Mind Tricks Radio, where we'll explore contemporary topics in psychology through interviewing creative and innovative thinkers in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan. Thanks for tuning in. We're here today once again with my friend and colleague, Dr. Tyler Ralston, a Honolulu-based psychologist who I've had on this show a few times. He came on to do some episodes with me talking about unwarranted guilt, red flags in relationships, and also about his experience with Tyke the elephant, an interesting episode he had in his life from many years ago. So I'd encourage everybody to take a listen to those episodes with Dr. Tyler. And we have decided to do a series of episodes talking about some interesting and educational topics in psychology. Most recently, Dr. Tyler was here and we had a fun conversation about the concept of psychological flexibility. That was the most recent episode. I believe that was, up to episode 62, I think, or 63, something like that. But anyway, today we're here to talk about the concept of hindsight bias, which is a cognitive distortion, and I've done a number of episodes about cognitive distortions, but this one will be done with Dr. Tyler, and it is an important one because it's commonly found as a fundamental cognitive distortion in trauma-related guilt, and it's touched upon a lot in trauma work. So I know Dr. Tyler does a lot of work with PTSD and trauma. And it's also found, though, as a cognitive distortion in day-to-day thinking and lots of different kinds of scenarios. So we thought this would be a fun and interesting topic to discuss. Tyler, it's great to have you back. Welcome back to Mind Tricks Radio. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's great to be back. It's always fun.
Yeah, so hindsight bias. Let's talk about just defining what that is, first of all. Can you talk a little bit about hindsight bias as a concept?
Yeah, sure. It's, in kind of simple terms, it's basically this idea of knowledge of an event's outcome. In other words, knowing how something turned out automatically tends to bias or distort what we thought we knew or what we're remembering as what we knew before those outcomes were known. It's a little bit confusing for people to get their mind around that, but it's sort of like when something happens and you now know how that turns out, the mere knowledge of knowing how that turns out will tend to bias or distort what we remember ourselves as knowing before that outcome was known.
Yeah, okay. So that is a little complicated. It's a kind of a tongue twister. Why don't we try one or two sort of like examples of what hindsight bias might look like?
Okay. I'm driving home from the beach. When I was at the beach, I was thinking, okay, on my way home, I want to stop at the store and get some apples, some fruit. I leave the beach thinking that. I end up pulling up at home in my driveway, and I realized I didn't get apples at the store on the way home. That's the outcome. The outcome in this case is I didn't get the apples. And I think, I should have gotten the apples on the way home. And I end up basically guilting myself about that. And I had the idea of getting the apples when I was leaving the beach, but as I was driving, it didn't occur to me, or I wasn't able to, or I got distracted or whatever. And I end up dumping all this excessive kind of hardship on myself. And even though it occurred to me to get apples, you can't do something like that if you're either not aware of it in the first place, not aware of it along the way in the process, or you don't have the skill to do it. And in this case, I was really wrapped up in a great song that I like, or several songs on the way home, singing and driving and singing, and it just totally spaced my mind to stop at the store and get the apples.
Okay, so it would make it hindsight bias if you're telling yourself you should have known better to do something differently than you did.
Right.
And what would that thing in this particular example be that a person might tell themselves they should have known better or done differently?
I should have known better than to just drive right on past the store singing my songs. I should have known to pay attention to stop and get the apples when I was right by the store.
Okay, and that's a cognitive distortion because why?
Because we can only do something if we know what to do and we have the skill to do it. And it's easy to look back and say, yeah, I knew what to do. But the reality is, in that moment, I wasn't aware.
Okay.
And therefore, I in that moment, I got so wrapped up in the song, for example, that I was not able to remember to get the apples.
You might be telling yourself, I should have known better than to put on music to listen to on my drive home that might distract me. Because of that, I missed the grocery store on the way home. Now I'm home, I don't have the apples, and I'm telling myself, that was stupid of me to put the music on, because if I hadn't done that, it wouldn't have distracted me and I would have gotten the apples. And so that's hindsight bias.
Great clarification. Yeah, totally.
And the reason why that's a cognitive error, a cognitive distortion, is that at the time I put the music on, it seemed like a reasonable thing to do because I wanted to listen to music on my way home. And I ended up getting distracted. But had I known at the time turning on the music would distract me, I probably wouldn't have done it.
That's right.
Because at that moment that I did it, I didn't know any better. I wasn't thinking to myself, should I or should I not turn on this music because it might distract me, and then choose not to do it.
Right.
That's
right.
what makes it
right.
a kind of distortion, right?
Yeah, like we can know these things on kind of the broader level, like leaving the beach and stuff. I know if I turn on music, I might distract myself. But the reality is we do all kinds of things as humans that we just do because we want to do or whatever.
Right.
We can't be, stuff happens. It's kind of like being human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like maybe another example might be something like, I'm not a betting person, so I don't know how betting people think. But let's just say there was a football game and you made a friendly bet with your friend about who was going to win the game.
Yeah.
And then your team lost. And then you find out that the quarterback had an injured shoulder. And it's possible that he didn't throw a good game because of his injured shoulder. And then you tell yourself, I should have known better than to make this friendly bet on my team because the quarterback had an injured shoulder. But what you're missing there is you didn't know, and how could you have known that the quarterback had an injured shoulder? Because there's no way for you to know unless you know somehow. And so why are you going to assume he has an injured shoulder unless you know he has an injured shoulder? So there's no way you could have known not to make the bet if you didn't know that he had an injured shoulder.
Well, that's right. That's right, for sure. If we compare that to the apple example, I did know that I wanted to get apples before I even got in my car to drive home. Mm-hmm. So it's not only knowing that's necessary, but it's also having the ability to do the thing.
Yeah.
In the sports betting example, it's like I just didn't know.
Right.
In the apple example, I knew, but I didn't have the skill or the ability once I started driving, started to hear that my favorite song playing, and I got kind of sucked into it and was singing and having a great time.
What you didn't know was that listening to the music might distract you from going.
That's right.
But you did know you wanted to get the apples.
And I did know I wanted to listen to the song, actually. But yeah, right.
Totally. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's do a couple more examples because these are fun. Like, how about a dating thing? Dating things are always fun to talk about. So, so a woman goes out on a first date with a man, and it was okay, I guess, had a good time, talked about setting up a second date, and then she goes out on the second date, and he's a total jerk the second time, and she says, I should have known better than to go out with this guy a second time because he's a total jerk. And I went and I looked at his Facebook, and I could tell by his Facebook posts that he is a really total jerk, and I should have known he was a total jerk because of these Facebook posts, which I looked at after the second date, right? Why is that hindsight bias?
Well, she didn't know at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't occur to her to look at the Facebook posts before the second date. Based on her first date, seemed like a great guy. It would make sense to go out again. And it's hindsight bias because after the fact, she learned more about him and that he's a jerk or not a good guy or whatever.
Well, but I'm such a dummy. If I was smart, I would have looked at.
I would say, well, how come you didn't?
Well, because he seemed like he was such a nice guy after the first date.
I would say there's your answer right there.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. The proof is in the pudding, right on the surface.
So we're rewriting history. We're telling ourselves, I should have known by the second date that he was a jerk by checking. But I didn't check because he was a decent guy after the first date, so that's why I didn't do it, and that's why it's a cognitive distortion.
That's right. It's really what we're talking about is also getting to this idea of becoming way more compassionate with oneself, related to this hindsight bias concept. So sometimes I take the hindsight bias concept, and I will say, instead of looking at it retrospectively, we'll say, let's take the same concept and look at it going forward. So I could ask you, Aaron, I could say, how come you're not doing the thing today to prevent the bad thing from happening 2 months from now?
Right.
And you would say, I don't know what that is.
Right.
And I would say, okay, Aaron, it's actually the letter A. Now you know what it is. It's the letter A. So I'd say, okay, now that you know what it is, how come you're not doing the thing to prevent A from happening 2 months from now? And you could say, well, I don't know what to do to prevent the letter A from happening. I'd say, okay, well, what you would do is the letter B. And so I could say, okay, now that you know what's going to happen 2 months from now that's bad, and you know what to do about it, which is B, how come you're not doing it today to prevent A from happening 2 months from now? And you could say, well, I don't know how to do B. I don't have that skill. So I could say, yeah, exactly right. In order to prevent the bad thing from happening 2 months from now, it takes having A, in other words, knowing what it is, B, knowing what to do about that to prevent it or change it, and C, having the skill to do that thing. And if you don't have any one of those, you might have two of them out of three or whatever, but if you're missing any one of them, there's a good chance it's going to go, the way that I'm saying, like A is going to happen in 2 months. And you can't really be held accountable for that. I mean, you can't fly if you're not able to fly.
Even if you know the A, B, and the C,
yeah,
and you're doing everything based on previous experience, to prevent the thing from happening or have it go the way you want it to go, there's always like some curveball, right?
Yeah.
Something that comes in that you try to do everything right, but the curveball comes in, it screws it up. Now you know that curveball might be a possibility. That might be a D or an E.
Right.
But if you don't know that curveball's a possibility, you can't really expect to be prepared for that.
That's right. That's right. So it ultimately leads to more compassion with self in a broad sense. It's not excuses or anything like that. It's just being more realistic and accurate and compassionate with self. I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball and nobody's got magical superpowers. So, it's just people are doing, for the most part, good people are doing the best that they can with what they got.
Right.
And stuff happens in life.
But let's do another example, like, I don't know, like a medical problem. And let's not make this a terminal one, just to try to keep this a little bit lighter. But somebody goes in to see their doctor and they find something going on with their body. And the doctor says, oh, we need to kind of start treating this before it becomes a bigger problem. And maybe makes an offhand comment, something like, if we had caught this a little sooner, it would have been a little easier to deal with and it wouldn't have gotten to where it's at right now. And then you're going home and saying, I should have known better. Like, the doctor is kind of scolding me for not being more on this and getting on top of this sooner and dealing with something I should have known. I should have known the signs were there. I should have been able to figure out I needed to deal with this sooner. Where's the hindsight bias there?
We could say, what is it specifically you should have known? And what would the person say usually?
I should have known that I was feeling some pain and discomfort in my body and went in to seek medical care sooner.
And so how come you didn't know to seek medical care sooner if you're experiencing that pain in your body or those sensations in your body?
Right, because I feel sensation in my body all the time and it's usually nothing and I don't get help for it.
And I didn't think at the time that this was bad enough or really meant anything.
Right.
It kind of crossed my mind, but I had more reason to believe it was like all the other times it was perfectly fine than I had to believe that it was, something else.
Right. So you're telling yourself, I should have done something differently in hindsight. I should have done something differently than I've done all the other times when I didn't need to do something differently.
Right.
And saying this time was different in some way.
Right.
Because the outcome was worse. That's why it's a hindsight bias.
Right.
In those other situations where I had discomfort in my body for various different reasons, and it was nothing, a muscle strain or whatever it might be, there was no bad outcome. I'm not having hindsight bias telling myself I should have gone to the doctor.
Right.
But I'm only telling myself this time because the outcome seemed bad to me and I should have known differently. And that's where it's a hindsight bias, right?
Right. It's the outcome like that. Learning that outcome information biases or distorts what one thought they remembered before that outcome was known. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So where do we see problems with hindsight bias affecting people typically in real life?
It can be all kinds of things. I mean, day-to-day things like the Apple example. I mean, all kinds of things. People say, "Oh, I should have done that." Oh, gosh, I should. I should have left work earlier because there was traffic on the road. And now I'm late to the social function we're going to after work. I mean,
and what is that? Does that like guilt? Is that kind of one of the main outcomes for that?
Yeah.
Like you feel guilty or feel stupid or negative self-talk.
Yeah.
And anger and toward yourself for not doing something differently.
Yeah, guilting is the big one with hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is heavily tied with guilt, and then of course guilt is tied with shame. So it's very, very common when people are guilting themselves in any kind of way with this stuff that they will also add in shame stuff. Oh gosh, I should have picked up the apples on the way home, and stupid me, what was I thinking? Yeah. Now we don't have apples for our thing that we're making apples with at home.
So right. So you're feeling. Maybe my wife had asked me pick up apples.
Yeah.
And she was going to make applesauce for dinner. And I didn't pick up the apples, and she was disappointed. Now I feel guilty. Yeah. I screwed up. I should have known better. I shouldn't have listened to that music, because if I hadn't, I would have stopped off at the grocery store, got the apples, and she could have made the applesauce. So I'm feeling guilty. And the shame part of it would be like, I'm so stupid.
Yeah,
I'm such a stupid person. I always do this. I'm an idiot. So the hindsight bias kind of feeds into a lot of the guilt and shame.
Yeah, the guilt being a specific I should have or could have kind of an event, and the shame related stuff that pairs with it is often a global put down of the whole body. Yeah, like she loves applesauce, and I wanted to hustle home and make her favorite applesauce so that when she got home, it was ready for her. And I totally spaced on the apples, and she came home and the applesauce wasn't ready.
Yeah, so I'm a lousy husband.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, there you go. And then generalizes to broader shame-related
That's the shame.
kinds of thoughts, which are other cognitive errors, of course. But yeah, right. Generalization of some of these things. Yeah.
So hindsight bias, generally speaking, is something as therapists we don't like.
Yeah, right.
It's considered sort of a
right.
When it comes to therapeutically speaking, for people beating up on themselves, feeling guilty, feeling badly, and also just not thinking rationally about how things happen in life. We like that our antennas go up whenever we hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some ways that people can keep an eye out for when they're using hindsight bias as a cognitive distortion? What can they do about it?
Yeah, to basically be aware of it. So broadly speaking, generally increasing awareness through any form of awareness practice can help with the broader concept of it. But more specifically, paying attention to like should have and could have kind of language, and even a lot of why questions. It came up in this conversation already a bunch. We'd said should have and could have a bunch, and shouldn't have and stuff like that. But like, oh, I should have picked up the apples. Oh, I could have saved some time by buying some apples a few days earlier, so when I came home from the beach, or in the medical example that you gave, if somebody said, oh, I could have gone to the doctor right when I started noticing those bodily sensations, then this would have been caught earlier, and I'd be, I wouldn't have these problems right now. Yeah. It's like the could have and should have usually signal that. And then the why questions feed it a lot too. Like, why didn't I go to the doctor? Why didn't I pick up apples on the way home?
Yeah.
Why didn't I see that this guy is such a bad news guy? I only learned after the second date, and furthermore, looking up on Facebook, why didn't I? And it just all ends up guilting the person a lot. They guilt themselves a lot if they're doing that kind of thinking or even that kind of language.
Yeah, sidebar, I really like what you're saying about the whys. This is one thing, I don't know if this comes up a lot with your work with your patients, but it comes up a lot with mine, that I find when people are looking at the irrational thought that's leading to the feeling or the emotion that they're working on, they often do pose things in terms of why. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? But I think when they're posing that kind of thought as a question, they're not really asking themselves a question why they did or didn't do something. They're really telling themselves something. So like, why didn't I stop and get the apples at the store? What they're really saying to themselves is, I should have stopped at the store to get the apples, and I'm an idiot for not doing that.
Yeah.
So the why. So what I would encourage people to do, if you are beating up on yourself or questioning yourself with a why question, recognize that you're not actually asking yourself a why question. You're telling yourself something that's implied with the why question. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I find that it's helpful for people to be able to see it that way.
And a lot of times when people are doing why questions, they're sort of, they get stuck in that loop.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sort of like hoping for a different outcome or something and it's already done. It can't be changed.
Yeah.
It sort of just keeps guilting them.
It's better that they figure out what it is they're actually telling themselves
Yeah.
about it, and then kind of work at that level.
Yeah.
And I like what you said too. Like, how do you recognize this? Well, the shouldas of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas is a indication that hindsight bias may be at play. But remember when we were talking about last week about psychological flexibility, and we were talking about the mindfulness part, about really paying attention to the thoughts and feelings? I think that really does apply here in this conversation about hindsight bias. To take a step back and say, what am I talking to myself about? How am I feeling? Could this be hindsight bias?
Yeah.
And then I think the last key piece of this that we've been talking about that I just want to highlight is, I think like the core of it is you ask yourself about the thing that I am feeling guilty or ashamed about. Did I really know at that time everything I needed to know that this was what the outcome was going to be?
I often frame that up, and it's very similar to that. It's like, well, put yourself back in your shoes at the time that you're thinking you, quote, should have or could have done something differently, and ask yourself, what was the reason I did what I did at that time, knowing only what I knew at that time, and only being able to do what I was able to do at that time.
Information, data, and experiences from my past that informed my decision at that moment.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, actually. The research studies on that, I think it was Fishoff in the mid-70s, 74 or 75, were the first to really look at that. And the research shows that it's a very strong tendency, even when people are kind of consciously aware, it's a very strong tendency to slip into hindsight bias-related thinking.
Yeah.
I want to go back for a moment to the should-haves, could-haves, and I think you said would-haves. I don't see the would-haves as part of that. Mm-hmm. I see the should-haves and could-haves. I kind of tend to look at the would-haves as, I would have had I known, or I would have had I been able. So it sort of allows for that. But the should-haves and could-haves imply that I had the capability, I knew better, and I didn't. And that guilts people a lot. Whereas the would have is like, I would have done that had I known or had I the skill. Yeah. But I don't know, maybe there's some variation.
No. That's
kind of how I think about that.
That's a very good distinction. I think that's an excellent point. So somebody who's using the would have is using the would have. I would have done this if I had known, but I didn't know. So I coulda, shoulda, but I couldn't and shouldn't because I didn't have the information. Yeah. Boy, that's a mouthful. I feel like we're in the Dr. Seuss episode right now.
Yeah. Like I would have gone to Hot Pot if we had the time, but it didn't occur to me that way.
Right.
So,
but I should have planned better with my time. Okay, I think we're going on a tangent here. Tyler, it's been really great having you on the show again. This was a really fun conversation about hindsight bias. For those of you who want kind of a deeper and more intense dive into this subject, I encourage you to look at my very first episode of Mind Tricks Radio, where we talk about unwarranted guilt with Dr. Tyler Ralston. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Mind Tricks Radio. I hope you have enjoyed the program. For more information about Mind Tricks, you can go to my website, www.waikikihealth.com. Be sure to subscribe to Mind Tricks on your preferred podcasting host to be notified of new episodes of Mind Tricks. Please take some time to give Mind Tricks a good rating and review wherever you're listening. It really helps get the word out to new listeners. And please like and share Mind Tricks posts on Twitter and Facebook by following your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan.